Hello, and yes, you read that title correctly. Earlier this year, my husband and I decided to leave California and move to Baltimore, and we bought a house without ever looking at it in person. So if you're thinking about buying a house sight unseen, then I hope you'll watch the rest of this video to learn about our experiences. For many years, it had been our dream to try house hacking, ever since the first time that we encountered Graham Stephan's YouTube channel. And for anyone who doesn't know what house hacking is, this is basically where you buy a multifamily property, like a duplex or a triplex or a fourplex, and you live in one of the units and then you rent out the rest of the units. So in a perfect world, assuming nothing goes wrong, not only does house hacking give you a place to live, but also it means that your tenants are paying for your mortgage. So now let's talk about some things that could have gone wrong. This home was built in 1910 and somewhere along the way it was remodeled as a duplex. And the whole time that we were going through the home buying process, I couldn't help but wonder, what if it smells weird or what if it's haunted? Because with a building being so old, you never really know what happened here. And unfortunately, these were questions that I wouldn't have answers to until I physically visited the home. Thankfully, the home is not haunted, at least to my knowledge, and it doesn't smell weird, but there are some really weird structural things going on with the house. So at this point, you might be wondering, why didn't you just go look at houses like normal people? First off, flying from California to the East Coast is very time consuming and it's very expensive. Not only do you basically spend a whole day flying because of the different time zones, but also you have to spend money on a hotel and then you have to stay there for several days as you tour several houses, and we would have felt pressure to find the perfect home in a specified amount of time. Also, at the time, we were both very attached to our California jobs, and neither of us wanted to volunteer as tribute to take time off to go look at houses. So let me paint a scene for you. It is spring 2021 and people are coming out of quarantine and they are buying houses, and houses are flying off the residential real estate market like hotcakes. So we knew that we didn't want to wait until we physically relocated to our new city to try to find a house. So instead we found a realtor who specializes in investment properties, and he was willing to show us houses over FaceTime. And the realtor's knowledge proved to be so invaluable, especially considering that we had never visited Baltimore before buying a house here. So tip number 1 is find a reputable buyer's agent who is very knowledgeable on all of the different neighborhoods in your new city. To give you a contrast of working with a buyer's agent versus a seller's agent, I'll share a quick story. One of the first properties that we toured over FaceTime was a fourplex, and it looked beautiful online. It had looked like it was in great condition, and on that particular day, our realtor was there and also the seller's agent was there. And almost immediately after walking through the door, our realtor was very honest with us that there was a very foul smell coming from the property. And also the property was not in a very good condition. And as we continued through the tour, the seller's agent didn't seem very helpful in honestly answering questions regarding the property. And as a cherry on top, the tour became even more amusing when it was time to go look at the basement. And suddenly, the seller's agent said he did not have access to the basement, and there had been no pictures of the basement online. So if we had listened to the seller's agent about how wonderful the property was, we wouldn't have known that it smelled bad, and we might have ended up with a house with a mystery basement, and who knows what could have been down there. So moral of the story is don't ever go through a seller's agent. Find your own buyer's agent as your realtor, because he or she will be so much more invested in helping you find your perfect home. So tip number 2, if you're planning on buying a house sight unseen, take a recording of each of the FaceTime tours so that you can reference them later if you have questions about each of the properties. We toured a few properties over FaceTime that had looked amazing on the internet, and unfortunately they did not look so great in real life, or rather over a FaceTime tour, as more and more houses that we wanted to tour kept coming off the market before we actually had a chance to see them, and the properties that we liked were coming off the market almost immediately after being listed. So on the same day that we toured our new home, we decided to make an offer on the duplex. So now let's get to the inspection report part. For anyone who's never purchased a home before, the inspection report part is terrifying. They basically take apart your house and tell you every single little thing that's wrong with it. Anything from a broken toilet seat to potentially problematic wiring issues. It was so helpful that the report included pictures and 3D video tours of everything that was listed as being wrong with the property. Even though the inspection report sounds terrifying, it's actually meant to protect you as the buyer. Once we had the inspection report, we went back and forth with the seller about things that we wanted fixed.
One eternity later.
And eventually the seller agreed to everything. So even though we knew we were buying a really old house, we had really high expectations for our first time in our new home. So before we get into everything that was wrong with the home, First, I want to focus on the positives and tell you about everything that went smoothly throughout this whole process. By the time that closing day came around, we had invested way too much time and way too much money into the whole home buying process, so we knew that regardless of the state of the home, we were going to be moving into this new home. We were originally worried that for the closing, one of us was going to have to take time off work and fly to the East Coast, and the other one of us would have to sign the power of attorney forms to give signing rights to the one who traveled. Thankfully, this ended up not being the case, and a notary person was able to come to our home in California. So this brings me to tip number 3, which is have a notary person come to your current home if you are okay with closing on a home without being there in person. After you close on the home, it's too late to turn back now, so congratulations, you're a homeowner now. And it's time to either prepare for life in your dream home or prepare for a possible nightmare. About a month after we closed on our new home, we finally planned a trip to Baltimore for the first time. If you end up buying a house sight unseen, then I really hope you'll make an effort to visit the home before actually bringing in all of your belongings and any pets. I know that it might sound completely counterintuitive that I'm telling you to go visit your home before actually moving in, but in retrospect, we're so happy that we visited the home about 2 weeks before actually moving in with our dog and all of our belongings. It felt so surreal to step into our new home after only seeing it over the internet, and it honestly felt like we were stepping into a movie scene. There were certain features of the house that looked amazing on the online listing, like the exposed brick wall or the metal ceilings or the cozy little fireplace, but all of these things looked 100 times more amazing in person, so being in the home was a completely different experience from seeing it over FaceTime. We closed on the home when it was springtime, but by the time we visited the home, it was summertime. And our first impression of the home was that it was very warm. And the inspection report had mentioned that the rooftop air conditioning unit was very old and that we should budget for replacements. We assumed that this meant that it had at least a few more months of life left in it. But we could have never imagined the sweaty future that awaited us. As we moved further into the home towards the kitchen, we couldn't help but notice that the air started to feel warmer and warmer as we approached the stove. The kitchen stove was pretty dirty and the burners felt pretty hot to the touch, almost as if someone had been there making breakfast a few minutes before we had arrived. But it seemed really unlikely that someone would be coming into our home just to use our stove. So the first thing we did is we made sure that all of the knobs were set to the off position, and they were. So why was our stove so hot? We tried turning off the pilot on the stove, and then the smell of gas filled the air like we had a gas leak. So then we turned off the gas of the stove, and now we just live like we have no stove. Around the same time that we were trying to figure out the mystery of our hot stove, we were both starting to feel the effects of our bad allergies. The house was pretty dirty, and even though we both really like cats, we're both allergic to cats, and unfortunately there was a lot of cat hair on the carpet. The realtor had been very honest with us during the FaceTime tour. He had warned us that the house was very dirty, but we didn't fully grasp this concept until we saw it in person. Because we had flown in from across the country, we didn't have any cleaning supplies with us, and we didn't want to buy a new vacuum cleaner for this one time of vacuuming our floor. So instead, we booked a housekeeping service through the Handy app. So here is tip number 5. Have a plan in place for cleaning your new home. It seemed like every corner of the house was covered in spider webs, each complete with their very own spider. And the windows in the cabinets were also really dirty. The Handy housekeeper truly saved the day and saved us from our allergies, and by the time she left, even though it was so miserably hot, the home felt so much more livable because it was cleaner. The house also has some other little quirks, like all of the cabinet storage space is very narrow, and there are some strange structural things like big drops near windows. In my opinion, the biggest structural anomaly about this house is the big drop next to the window by the stairs. If anyone was to fall down there while going down the stairs, they would likely fall all the way down to the basement, and this is absolutely terrifying. I'm planning on putting a big plant down there to hopefully keep anyone from falling, but if you have any suggestions on what plant should go there, or if you have any other suggestions on how to make that drop safer, then please let me know in the comments below because I would appreciate any advice on this matter. There's also another one of these drops by the kitchen window. The drop in the kitchen looks like it's had many years worth of liquid spilled into it. And the first time we visited the home, there was a piece of like a Cheeto or a Dorito down in the drop, so it was very unpleasant to look at. The realtor had showed us these drops over the FaceTime tour, but once again, we didn't really understand these things until we actually saw them in person. And at this point you might be wondering, do we regret buying a house without ever looking at it in person? And overall the answer is no, for a few reasons. It was very convenient to tour houses from the comfort of my workplace's break room over FaceTime, rather than having to spend a whole day traveling to the East Coast and a few extra days actually touring houses in person. Also, when we were originally considering moving, knowing that we wanted to buy a house, we started looking for some short-term leases in some relatively safe areas, and we realized that not only were short-term leases pretty hard to come by in these areas, but also these were out of our price range. So that's another reason why we ended up buying a house before actually moving to our new city. In our case, everything worked out, and we ended up in a nice neighborhood surrounded by very friendly neighbors. But I'm very aware that the story could have ended up very differently and not in a good way.